Hello to all. I'm here today with something completely different from our usual content. In my Worcester, having just recently reground her finally, my Worcester is spec'd out the way I prefer to spec her, and that is for basically the strongest effective AA against aircraft carriers possible. So that's with basics fire training and slot 6 AA module for plus 25% constant DPS values. This is a training room. I am using 3 bot Hakurus. This of course does mean they are gonna have stock planes, which are a bit weaker, and they're gonna not have captain skills. They are, however, on bot level AI high, and they are armed and moving, as you can see. So I'm just putting 3 Hakurus to kind of represent the relative volume of attack of one skilled Hakuryu player, just to demonstrate that. Although AA is a bit on the weak side, fully properly spec'd AA ships such as the Worcester can still put a sizable dent into tier 10 aircraft with a little bit of specking. Now, most people would prefer not to spec their ships in such a specialized manner. They prefer to do a more general build, so probably BFT would be Demolition Expert and Slot 6 would be Reload module for anti-surface capabilities. After all, there's going to be 11 surface ships other than the carrier in the match to worry about with your Worcester main battery, but this is just a proof of concept, and I just run this my Worcester this way normally in randoms anyhow, so this is how I prefer to play her. So my Worcester certainly has always given me pretty decent anti-aircraft performance. We are on patch 0.9.4 by the way, so in the midst of the Soviet heavy cruiser arc, so rework carriers have been out for quite some time at this point. So just going to glide towards those armed and moving carrier bots. And wait for combat to begin. One bot Hakuryu sends APDBs. 3 APDBs. My AA begins to open up. I'm going to wait a little bit before popping defensive fire for all 3 of them to enter. Quick sectoring quickly destroys all of these planes. You can see if they don't hit flak bursts, they don't get dispatched that easily, but my defensive fire lasts 40 seconds, and at about 25 seconds, all 36 planes have been dispatched. Cycle my AA, not going to have defensive fire for next squadron, but the Worcester has fairly potent capabilities. Half-strength APDB squadrons heading toward me. Only one, still going to sector you regardless. Showing a bit of side here in order to maintain my sector. Sector's over, so now I'm going to actively dodge. Hard rudder left. Burst it with the sector. Quite easily trimming down those tier 9 planes, at least I think they're tier 9. I was under the impression that bots have stock modules, so that's my belief, but perhaps I'm wrong. Finally, full torpedo bomber squadrons. My defensive fire is not yet up. Sector for a quick 5,000 damage burst. AI hits a flak burst. This guy's on the wrong sector side, but that's fine. Sector's about to expire anyway. He does manage to get a drop off, but you can see me quite easily destroying these squadrons. No need to defensive fire yet, gonna wait for more planes in the vicinity. You can see the hack torpedo bombers are quite fragile. With the help of the AA burst sector module in slot 3, you can see I'm quite well equipped. Gonna pop defensive fire at this point, so now even without the sector active, my AA is quite potent. The rockets do actually manage to get an attack off, in spite of the defensive fire. Bursting this rocket squadron. And you can see the AA DPS ticking at 100 per tick, and it's more than 1 tick per second, so. At this point, the Hakaryus are quite deplaned. I've chewed through about 120 planes. My defensive fire finally expires. Aiming for the front of the Hakaryu bows, I've been hit all of one time. Now I wish I currently had an actual player here with me to control a carrier. But you can see, more or less, I'm no slouch. Just get another rocket attack off as I close the range. But at this point, with this much AA in my build, I'm basically unstrikeable. These are of course stock planes with no captain skills, but you can imagine what it's like for a tier 8 plane to face off against a Worcester. Especially when their heal cooldown is, or heal consumable is on cooldown, not exactly too much they can do. I'm aiming for the bow, by the way, because I have not enough armor to pen the deck, so just aiming a bit lower, hoping to hit this section over here. Just hosing them down of HE. You can see that carrier damage control keeping him up quite admirably. As long as I avoid that belt armor strip in the middle, I'll be just fine. And the carriers have stopped sending planes because they are in fact pretty much deplaned at this point. Scratch one. Now the Hakuryu Citadel is actually quite large. Let me see if I can demonstrate for you. Should be in the center of the ship underneath the smokestack. Booster AP is nothing special, but it's not unimpressive. Pens only. There we are, right under the smokestack is where you want to aim, if you ever get the opportunity to punish with AP. Now do note his secondaries are actually quite potent. They do have 25mm of penetration by default. As I dispatch this Hakuryu quite easily. And clean up the last of the 3 Hakuryus. So sum total 191 planes destroyed and 3 kills. Detailed report wise, you can see the AA damage is quite phenomenal over the course of a game. 16 fighter planes, and then the rest are real, so 191 minus 16 gives me 175 real planes destroyed. You can see each Hakuryu has quite a hanger. Now heading back into port, just to show off. Let me just change this back to random battle, because I always forget. This is, of course, the Worcester. So captain-wise, a fairly standard cruiser build. Priority target, Adrenaline Rush, IFHE. Oh, sorry, Adrenaline Rush Superintendent, IFHE. Concealment Expert. From there, I'm just deviating. Instead of taking the normal Demolition Expert, taking BFT. This does, of course, neuter my fire chance. You'll note that even with flags, my fire chance is only 7%. And after that, there's no other real AA skills you can take. Now, massive AA fire does exist, but do note that the Worcester is a dedicated AA ship that makes use of its priority sector. So you don't really want the burst, you want that high constant of DPS. And in addition to that BFT, I of course have slot 6 AA module, which does give secondary battery stuff, but also gives 15% AA damage and 15% flak explosion. And when your defensive fire is popped, you get 2 extra flak puffs, which means that you go from the normal 6 to 8. Slot 3, I have reduced AA prep time. Now normally you're not going to make too much use of this, so it's fairly safe to go aiming systems, but just for the sake of saying I'm quote-unquote full AA, I went for AA Guns Modification 1. I haven't found myself to be missing aiming systems Modification 1 that much anyway. And so you can see with this spec in particular, the Worcester's AA is mostly focused on its medium range aura. You can see that enormous 576 constant DPS, and the average DPS comes out to 512. So 191 on short range, 576 medium range, and 182 long range. So once people hit that 4-kilometer aura, you do a massive amount of damage. Just for context, a midway rocket plane, or let's do something, actually, let's do Hakuryu planes. A midway torpedo bomber or dive bomber. So these are the way my torpedo bombers and dive bombers are spec'd. So they have about 2100 health. So ticking 512 average DPS per second, 182 on the long, and then once you hit the medium range, you get to that about 512 damage. It kills a torpedo bomber or dive bomber in about 4 ticks. 4 ticks being less than 4 seconds, which is not bad, but then keep in mind that you can amplify this amount of damage with priority sector reinforcement, amplifying it up to a further 750 or so average damage, and then you pop defensive fire, which gives another 50%. So you can double it to get about 1000 continuous DPS per second, which kills a plane every 2 seconds, and that's of course without them hitting any of the heavy flak buffs. This is in comparison, of course, to a regular stock booster, so most people will be running Demolition Expert and an actual reload module in this slot instead. So I have 25% amplified AA compared to a regular booster build, which doesn't sound like that much in comparison, but then do note that I have 500 continuous DPS currently. So if you take 512 and multiply it by 0.75, you should get the value that a stock booster has, because I don't want to demount my modules. So that comes out to 384, just shy of 400 DPS. And what that comes to practically, in terms of difference, is that you spend an extra tick and a half on each Hakuryu plane, which does add up to quite a few ticks over the course of a game. Now, more practically, it would be better to show you in another training room if I took off both these modules and BFT and used a different captain, for example, but don't have time for that today. I just wanted to kind of show off the efficacy of full AA booster if you do happen to spec for it. Now, I'm not saying that planes or carriers are in a particularly healthy spot in particular. By doing this, I'm just saying that it is possible to fully AA spec a ship and have visible results on the screen. It just does require some real sacrifices in terms of your surface action, but honestly, with 4.6 second reload even with this build, and still having 7% fire chance after you mount flags to kind of make up for the lack of Demolition Expert, well, honestly, the booster is still an AA goddess. You just really have to dedicate some time to her. And yeah, that was it. Just a short demo of the booster AA prowess. I hope that was somewhat informative of just what you can do if you're willing to sacrifice for it with the booster, and I will catch you all later. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.